So thank you all for joining. This is our Blossom into 2024 workshop. So today's workshop is going to provide hopefully a bit of an overview of some day-to-day practical tips and suggestions. So homework, strategies for school, strategies for just day-to-day elements that maybe interfere with a person that has or a child that has a learning difference. So what we're going to look at is, I suppose, some top tips around spelling. We'll do a little bit on reading, and we'll do a little bit of an overview if we get time on writing. And we don't have a lot of the assistive technology built into today's workshop, but I'll provide you with some top tips as well to kind of find a little bit more on those resources. And then also how to create the environment for homework or for study or even for yourself at home. What are the top kind of tips that we would look at to create that environment that would harness more of a productive mindset and a lot more, I suppose, efficient in that process. Little bit of an overview. I won't stay on these long. We've been very fortunate to work with many organisations. It's lovely to have so many new people on our workshop today. For those of you who don't know, we obviously operate in the space of working with students with neurodiversity, so mainly around the personalised support, either in a one-to-one or in a group setting. We look at kind of younger kids all the way up to adults who want to continually learn and thrive, either in the workplace or in a different environment. We're very holistic and well-being focused, so it's very much about, I suppose, seeing the child and meeting them where they're at. As we know, there's massive overlaps between a child or a person that has a learning difference and also a mental health difficulty, and either that be stress or anxiety or something else really that may be under the surface. So it's really important that we factor those into consideration when we're looking at a child or looking at a student, because they may have a lot of other things going on and that might be affecting their learning also. Some of our initial services, so obviously we do screening and assessments, consultations, and we work with schools, and then we also work with organisations. As I mentioned, we have both one-to-one and group classes. I myself take them, and we have a team of tutors. And we also have a course, which is great. We've only launched that in the last number of months for parents and teachers, and I'll chat a little bit more about that later today. We have a camp. We only take a few kids on each of our camp weeks, so it's capped at about between 4 and 5 kids. We don't take any more, just to give them all the individualised attention. And we do a transition to secondary school program. So for kids that are starting off in secondary school, we do a program around that. And we've just launched as well our upcoming podcast. If anybody has any questions, hopefully some of you already have my details, considering you've gone on most of you to the website. But look, feel free. Again, if people have to drop off, there's no problem there. I totally appreciate everybody's time is really important, especially during the evening times. So if anybody has any pressing questions or topics that we don't look at today, please feel free to send me an email, or if you have any further questions or queries as things pop up for you, I'm more than happy to help or provide any suggestions as best as we can. So to kick into some of our top strategies. So when we're working with kids really that maybe in a younger age group, or even, teenagers, and we often do this with some of our older adults that maybe still have difficulties in certain areas around spelling, with handwriting or phonics or word formations. These are some of our kind of essential tips. Now, each one has a different method, as you can see. So we'll have a little bit of an overview of each. So our bubble method up the top is obviously transferring the word into more of a bubble style approach, which used to be kind of common maybe before in school, where kids used to learn how to write that way. It's not used as much anymore, but scientifically it has been proven to work for some kids. So it's important to note that not all 8 of these will work for every child. Definitely I wouldn't say try doing all 8, can be a little bit overwhelming. But maybe start trying one, sticking with it, seeing how it goes, and then saying, okay, do we need to pick another method, or is this working for certain words? Some of these approaches as well might work for smaller words, and some might work better for longer words. Some might work depending upon their humor, and some mightn't work. So it's really important to, I suppose, alter the approach as best as possible. Our second one then is colour coding. So colour coding is used an awful lot with students, especially as we kind of move either a little bit from primary into secondary with all the coloured notebooks and the refill pads. And colour is definitely becoming a really big prominent factor for someone that has a neurodifference. There isn't a lot of maybe what we call beneficial science to back lots of this up yet. But for myself and for our students that we work with, consistently looking at black text or blue text on a white page just gets a little bit kind of jumbled. So definitely using an element of color here can help. So what we've done is we've picked out particular letters. They're either the vowels or the consonants, and you want to highlight those letters usually in a different color to emphasize that. So often students that may have difficulties with particular letters, if they have a neurodifference, then maybe highlighting those or putting those particular letters in a different color at times. It's not always possible to do it all the time with everything. But if there are particular days where there's particular study elements or particular words to learn off, this can really help as well as approach to use. The rainbow method, I suppose, is fairly self-explanatory, using a range of colours to help, I suppose, usually in those longer word formats. So anything between 7 to kind of upwards, 8 to 9, 10 letters can really help and be useful. And we wouldn't use the rainbow method as a regular method if we're learning off spellings or learning off our spellings for a Friday test, because as you can imagine, using a different colour all the time would take a little bit of time, and students can use that as a kind of a distraction element. So I would just pick maybe if for one particular word or if there's a particular new word that might be tricky, this method can work really, really well, and they get to pick out the colours and have a little bit more of an interaction element with it. Then our stairs writing, lots of kids like this actually really, which is great. So each element of the stairs, you add a letter on. It can also work the other way. So let's say from the bottom all the way up. So you can add it as if you were, walking up the stairs in a house. And each particular step then has a different letter to add on. It's good then to practically apply this. So like as they're actually maybe walking up a stairs or, in and out of the stairs or a few steps in school, it becomes more habitual then as well, can be said out loud as each step they can say the next letter if they wanted to, if it was something that they could integrate into their, let's say, everyday life instead of onto a page, can be useful. And step number 5, so is writing with our wrong hand. So if we're right-handed, we would use our left, and if we're left-handed, we would use our right. If that's still a little bit undiscovered or kind of learning that out at the moment, it's about combining both of those two. And there's a lot of, I suppose, neuroscience in this, so we won't look at this specifically today, but a really good topic if anybody's interested in that area, because we have lots of different parts of our brain. So using our right side and using our left side generally is a little bit disjointed for somebody that has a learning difference. So using the wrong hand can often help. Again, it takes a little bit more time, maybe a little bit frustrating initially, so may not work for all students and for all children, but again, can be quite useful to help with certain keywords. Our alphabetical order, again, if we're learning off a list for number 6, this can be useful to do. And then rhyming, so grouping up words with things that they sound like can help with that. And then you can also actually develop an understanding of new words while you're doing it. Dictionary work, I'm personally not a major fan of. I think that traditional form of looking up a word can be very challenging for a student, especially if at times they don't maybe know what the next letter is. I myself used to find dictionary work next to impossible because sure, I was spelling the words probably incorrectly. But I suppose using alternative forms of that, so like dictionary work on the computer or using a dictate and then the word comes up for you. So different kind of ranges of tools that kind of expand from that traditional get the book and look it up from the dictionary. Okay, so some key strategies then in terms of writing. Now it's important to note here that if we are moving away from writing and moving into more of a typing space, that I suppose is a really great resource to do, and we would highly encourage that for students that have difficulties with their handwriting, or maybe have a diagnosis of dyscalculia from an OT, or sorry, dysgraphia from an OT. But if they're not, even day-to-day tools on iPads or on apps or on typing software can really help, because if a child isn't maybe getting that assistance now, there may be further down the line where they may need to develop those skills anyway. And as we know, we're kind of a tech-based economy at the moment. So definitely kind of picking up little bits of tools around typing can be really good. And we would highly encourage that. Even for students that, really enjoy handwriting or have great handwriting, it would still be a quite useful strategy to take on board if that was feasible for them. So some of our key strategies we'd mentioned for around the writing space. So I suppose here we would look at both younger kids and then even teenagers and even then into adults. So we have lots of adults that maybe have gone back to do third level education or even day to day in the workplace and find lots of these aspects maybe just a little bit more challenging and tricky. So our initial concept is around planning what we need to write. And I suppose sometimes that's an awful lot easier said than done. I suppose it's drafting out a little bit of an outline, and those drafts are very different from student to student. So we might have a younger kid that maybe needs to do, a few sentences of a story, and they may need to then initially draw that out as a picture, and then we translate that into a word or a sentence structure. We may have a secondary student that may need to plan out, a poetry answer or do a geography question, and we need to plan that out paragraph to paragraph. So it's very much dependent upon where the student is at or where you're at yourself, and then how best to kind of plan and structure wording and context around that. A great way we do that is through our mind map approach. So when we work with students in a one-to-one or even in a group setting, we teach them, I suppose, I believe, our method around mind mapping. So I did an awful lot of research myself in my own studies in university around mind mapping and how best to, I suppose, make that as easy enough a process to retain and understand information. Now, you'll find that lots of students that if they're preparing for state exams, a traditional kind of mind mapping approach will not be able to be retained really in a longer term memory part of our brain, because if there's just words and colors everywhere, that's just a little bit chaotic. So how we generally tend to do mind maps is in a form of how we might answer it in a question. So bits of our information that need to go into, let's say, our start or introduction, bits of our information that go into our first or a second or a third paragraph, if we need examples, if we need our conclusions, and they're mapped out in what we call a clockwise fashion. So there isn't just words kind of scattered around, and there isn't a lot of sentences, so it's very, very minimal amount of content. And it's done in such a way that you could see it if it's stuck on the wall, so it's not cluttered, but it also then is repetitive. So our aim is to then look at it, and then obviously we'll go through a learning style with them for that. So if anybody wants more in that mind map, I'm happy to kind of share a little bit more of an outline on that with people as a follow-up, but definitely kind of doing a little bit of a research into the mix after the planning, then we move into the mind map stage can be really useful. For students then as well that may have handwriting difficulties, so if we've not yet moved towards the typing space, and we just have kind of day-to-day handwriting difficulties in school, we would use this range here. It's the Easy Start range, just that I've written in the yellow box. For all of our students, really it doesn't matter what kind of age range they are. There's a pen and there's a pencil version, and they're really, really useful to help with the position that we hold a pen or a pencil. So lots of students, if they were involved or affected or out of school by the pandemic, which most were, maybe have a little bit more at times, unfortunately, of catching up to do than what they would like. And their handwriting grip can often change and evolve. So these particular range will help with that. Lots of students we would use, but we would give them to them and they'd give them a try. And it can be a little tricky, it can take a little bit while to adapt to, but we would highly recommend them as they're really, really easy to use then over time and really do help a student with their formation and handwriting. Coloured pages and lined pages. So the important differentiation there, we generally don't suggest just normal kind of coloured sheets unless something is in a printout form or unless we're doing some form of artwork. As you can imagine, somebody with maybe an element of neurodiversity, getting them to draw or write, on a page without any straight lines is quite complex. No matter what age group, so they don't even have to be a child drawing out that or trying to do it even by memory or trying to judge how close they are to the page in terms of lines is quite challenging. But coloured lined pages are quite useful. So pinks and blues, greens. We would say at the moment it's done based upon preference. There is a little bit more research to show that the yellow coloured lined pages work a little bit more for more students, but I think that that's just because they were more than likely first on the market. Lots of the others kind of colours that came in a later date. So I have loads of kids that like either or. They might jump in and out of colours. They have a different colour copybook for different subjects. Whichever really works, really, to be honest. It just breaks up again the monotony of looking at a white copybook with black or blue text. Coloured markers and pens. With this, we do have a little bit of a caveat, especially for our secondary school students that are doing exams or doing pre's now in the next little while, to kind of limit then the amount of colouring or highlighting. So it can often be a little bit too much. Even half the book or half the page can be coloured. That's important and that's important. And that's, not great then, because then nothing's important and nothing stands out. So it's very much being very selective with what is coloured or what is highlighted, because those are the things we're more likely to have more of a remembrance on. So again, if we were doing a mind map approach, it would be, underlining or highlighting or changing the color pen for the really key pieces of information, or the key pieces that are finding a little bit more tricky to retain. So if I'm finding that a student, they maybe forget this example regularly, or they leave out, these one or two parts in their question, it'd be about us coming up with a way to how do we retain that, because some of the rest of the information then is okay and they keep retaining that. Visual storyboards can be great. So again, as I mentioned to you, with the kind of tandem with the planning aspect, doing out a visual representation of what it looks like can really, really help. And that doesn't have to be like loads of colours and, leaving cert artwork or anything like that. It can be a quick illustration, just a quick overview, again, to kind of contrast all of the text and all of the words. The visual side in a picture format can be really, really useful to represent the information differently. One of our core main concepts, really, because it's obviously so embedded still in our school structure and in our exam structure, is our layout options. And really, for no matter what subject we're doing, a little bit different when it's short questions, but for no matter what long answer, we're generally trying to look at some form of a layout structure for the examiner to mark it, for them to pick up our key points, and for them to finish marking the page and be like, okay, I got what they were saying. And we would do a lot of work, even with our younger students, like even in fifth and sixth class, to try and prepare them a little bit for this transition, because it can often be a little bit of a shock, starting in first year or moving through school. We still have some fifth and sixth students that may start with us recently that find this concept very difficult. How do we lay out something with some form of an introduction, some form of points, and then some form of a conclusion? And going off that model can really, really help then in those moments of panic, in those moments where we meet a question and we're really unsure as to what to write down or what to answer. It's going back to the tools, and any of these things add up to form a bit of our tool belt. Okay, how do we tackle this? What are the basics? And then from there, we put on the building blocks. When we're learning off then, or trying to go through study or different material, again, probably more for our secondary school students, a little bit on this particular aspect, but the drafts can be really good. Now, they can be really tiring depending upon how long they're going to be. So we would suggest definitely either dictation format. Sometimes the growth in voice notes can be really good. It doesn't always have to be in a traditional written text format. It can be alternative ways that they do out drafts of a particular answer that can help them as well with their memory and retention. So if there's particular questions, if there's particular concepts that they're finding a little bit trickier, it's definitely doing those out and to correct them, the student, or if they're not with us, maybe the teacher can correct them, or somebody else can have a look through them. And obviously that element of feedback is then really important. So lots of students find that difficult because they don't really maybe get the feedback and understand it in a way that they need to. So it's very much that delivery of feedback and how that's kind of illustrated to them. And then, as you mentioned at the start of this slide, obviously if there's still handwriting difficulties present, and there is maybe further remits to go on there, or there has been a dysgraphia or dyscalculia or a further diagnosis, then opting for a typing approach. Our two main typing programs that we do a lot of work with is Nessie typing. So Nessie would definitely be for our younger age group audience. It can be really, really interactive and just such a great platform. And then for our kind of maybe early secondary to college students, we'd recommend more the typing.com approach. A little bit more adulty or kind of teenagery based. There's free and paid platforms for all of those. And has a really, really great, I suppose, typing tools and resources. We would definitely suggest any student or any household that has still more a tablet or an iPad having that facility of the keyboard. Typing on a screen is definitely a great skill to have, but just a little bit disadvantageous because unfortunately still in state exams there will still be a keyboard. Now, our main recommendation is that if a younger student is moving from fifth, well, maybe fifth and sixth class, that they would then transition more to a laptop based at that stage because again there aren't iPads approved for state exams. It is more the laptop. So if a student is doing their junior cert or their leaving cert, they will be given a laptop by the department to go in and do that. So as more comfortable that we can get with using a laptop and typing in that format as early as possible, can be a great skill to have and I suppose retain as we move through school. And we do look at this then a little bit more in our dyslexic course. So we have a range of modules. I won't go through all of these with you now, but if anybody wants any more information, please do get on to us or send us an email. This is a kind of delving in a little bit more into things around the practical day to day and the overlap with managing maybe stressful situations and delving hugely into particular apps, particular software programs, and then the spelling and the writing piece. We do a little bit of maths as well and reading. And it's mainly for teachers and for the parents themselves at home. So, if you're stuck with a dilemma problem, and not really sure what the best next kind of solution is, we go through a lot of that in our course program on our website. So our next slide, I know we've a few teachers joining and we've a few that wanted to listen to the recording. What we say with this for kind of parents and for teachers is that if you're a parent, these can often be really good to share with a teacher that, is teaching a child, or if they're in secondary, maybe, at upcoming parent teacher meetings. Again, we do a lot of school workshops and, teachers have a lot of, I suppose, capacity and capabilities and a lot of pressure, unfortunately, at times on their shoulders with so many high numbers in the school system. So you'd be surprised sometimes, teachers just get caught in the day-to-day things and have so many other things that, they're maybe very open to additional suggestions. And then there may be other teachers, that do their own elements of further learning. So again, these can apply at home. They can also apply in a school setting. So it's very kind of universal that way. In terms of font, so if teachers like printing out sheets, or again, even if a student is at home, there is a lot of growth in the dyslexia friendly font. Again, anybody's interested in that can literally just Google dyslexia font and you'll get a range of different options. We find it and we've tried it with lots of our age groups and different students, and we're not particularly sure. Does a lot of it make a huge amount of difference? It might do. Again, it can be very individualistic. So that's, I suppose, the main approach to take of trialing it with the student at home or in a classroom setting. See, does that actually work or make a difference? And if not, then maybe moving away from that. There are other two between Arial and Cabrilli we would suggest as our main two other formats there. In terms of size, again, this is just kind of a general thing that we've kind of developed over the years. Unless there's any eyesight difficulties or any other further flags, we don't need, massive font. If anything, then actually, if it's too big, it's a little overwhelming because it takes up too much of the page and then you have to print out more and more pages. So we just want to kind of meet in the middle. So our limiting backgrounds and our white backgrounds on paper, as we were saying. Hopefully people might have an overview of colour overlays. So colour overlays, for anybody that hasn't become familiar with them as of yet, is usually like a plastic, it's kind of like a see-through plastic sheet, basically. Imagine like a Polly Pocket, but then you can get them in lots of different formats and sizes. These can come in different colours. There's lots of great sites. So again, if anybody wants to look into them, they're a little tricky to get, I think, as far as I'm aware, but can be really, really useful to implement. And again, don't need kind of any major assessment recommendations. Students that maybe have had an assessment for Irlen lens syndrome, so they would wear, let's say, more the colored glasses. That's a little bit different to this particular avenue. But color overlays is basically just breaking up again that monotony of a white page and putting this colored kind of see-through sheet over it. We'd have students that would you get a pack of them, they're lots of different colours, and they may jump in and out of the different colours. It can help them at home if they're reading, if they don't want to bring it into school, and they can be really, really handy and practical. And again, like loads of our teenagers and adults would use colour overlays just again if they're like reading a lot or working through different materials. Our headings and our subheadings and our bullet points, again, we mentioned in our last slide about our layout are limiting red pen, and we do feel that this has definitely progressed massively, thankfully, due to COVID. So I do feel like there's lots of online corrections more and more. So particularly for our secondary school students, so our online corrections is definitely kind of the way to go. And thankfully there hopefully isn't as much red being used. But as you can imagine, a student that sees red regularly can lead to a lot of doubt, a lot of strain. There's constant corrections, or there's constantly things to change. So it's just about illustrating that feedback, maybe in a different way, using a different color, maybe having it just in one section instead of having it on each page, so they have to read through all of the different notes. It's just about seeing as well, what way would be the most receptive for them. If, as a teacher, if you're investing time into trying to give feedback, well, if it's not going to be read or received in the way that you need it to be, how can we do it a little bit differently? So then it's a win-win, so that you're not consistently correcting the same thing and then they're also getting something from it. Because more than likely, if you're writing it and it's also in a red pen and they have to read it, there is going to be some element of misinterpretation there anyway. So it's how do we illustrate that maybe to them, orally or in a different format, as well as it being written onto a page. The one instruction at a time, we were reminded of this again recently when we met another parent that they had previously done an assessment many years ago, and they feel like they've gotten out of the habit a little recently, where they're like, oh yeah, actually we used to be told we should do one instruction at a time, and now we go tell them get the boots and get the jacket and then get ready by the door. And there's that kind of day-to-day element of prepping and planning that gets caught up in the middle, and that's totally normal. And it's very difficult to implement this on a day-to-day basis, and maybe there's certain times of the day it's a little bit easier to do than others, and that's totally fine. It's just about, I suppose, trying to see what way again will be the most useful for a student, and how kind of tired are they already from the school day, or a bad night's sleep, and what can we do to kind of get the most out of it. Because if somebody's repeating themselves as well, that's also a drain, and unfortunately a bit of an energy sapper as well from yourselves. So you'll also be tired, unfortunately. Speaking slowly and not loudly. So lots of parents we would have before, and teachers as well at times, especially in a classroom setting. There's so much going on. They might feel like, well, if we speak at a different pace or speak in a different way, or change that tone and vocal variety, it can help some students. But again, kind of like the font size, if there isn't an element of hearing difficulty mentioned or being monitored, then there's probably no need to change that level of dialect, unless obviously a student has another element going on. So they still can obviously process and understand things in a similar way. It's just how it's delivered and how clear the instructions are to them. Visual cues, we won't go through all of these because we'll be here for a while. Movement breaks, massive growth in movement breaks. So we'd highly encourage students that have the capacity in the school environment to partake in movement breaks. And if the more and more they can be facilitated, there's a vast amount of research between movement correlation and memory retention. So we would really, really encourage as best as possible as much growth and movement while we're learning, and just that ongoing feedback element also. Okay, we'll fly through, guys. So our homework. So we've done lots on homework over the last few years. I suppose there's a mix between different subjects, different tools, different ways of doing it. And I suppose the most important thing with homework, again, it's obviously quite age dependent, but it is really individualistic, which makes it very tricky, I know, as a parent to try and, figure out what way works best. But what we would suggest with homework is, again, if a student has already moved through school a bit, you'll have already picked up, okay, well, this way doesn't work and this way might work a little bit better, or a combination of approaches. It may evolve and change. So as we move through different years, obviously move from primary to secondary, as there are different activities, things will consistently change with homework. And it often is very hard to keep track of then what actually worked previously and what might work in the future but isn't working now. So just that monitoring approach can really help, and being a little bit curious and inquisitive. Okay, well, when we did it this way before, that was a little bit easier. Can we do a little bit of that now? Or if before wasn't working and now it's a little bit easier, how do we help maintain that? So the environment aspect we find is really, really essential for all of us. Okay, all the studies show that obviously there's clutter or there's lots of things going on in our surrounding environment. It's very difficult for us to absorb and be fully focused and retain information, no matter what it is. Whatever activity we're doing, if there's lots of things going around, we are naturally distracted as human beings. So we would do a lot of work with a student on how their environment is set up. In the pandemic, it wasn't always possible, but we do recommend as best as it possibly can, even a small desk space or a small table space, even at the side of a room or a different part of the house or whichever. It doesn't have to be a full office, and particularly if it's a younger student, that might be a little bit overwhelming as well. But just having that dedicated space that they'd carry out their homework or their study, they then know that like that space then isn't for additional activities. So what can happen is if the same space or the same things are being used at the weekend or in downtime, it can kind of be a little bit like, oh, well, I do homework here, I don't really want to sit here. So just having that spot, however small or however neat it is, can be really good to just dedicate that then towards school. Desks and chairs and kind of that whole posture aspect is definitely really something to note as well. For smaller kids, unfortunately there isn't a lot done on chairs being aligned with how they sit, and lots of kids will, swing their legs, or they'll sit with one leg underneath them, or they'll need cushions and they'll need bits and pieces because their height isn't matching the table. They're either hunched over or they're leaning back. So just something to note, especially with a younger student at home, how comfortable are they actually doing their homework? Can they sit, and can they, do they have proper lighting? Can they adjust to the surrounding? Because if they're not, then their chances of them being able to retain concentration is also limiting. Then the resources. So is there books nearby? Is there a shelving unit? Is there a space that they could put it in? Do they just take them out of the bag and put them back in the bag if they're a younger student? But then if they're a secondary student, where are they putting all of their activities? Where are they putting their sheets? They may have lockers, great, but we'd really highly suggest definitely getting into a habit quite early, kind of moving into secondary school, and as we progress in secondary school, having some form of a system where we know where books are, we know where copies are, and how we kind of manage that. And we would do a lot of work with students of all age groups around this, and both genders as well. It's definitely not one dimensional, it definitely applies to lots of different age groups. Fidget toys, a little bit of a hot topic over the last number of years. Some students love them, some don't. Some schools don't like them, some do. I suppose it needs to be used as best as possible in moderation, is kind of the main rule of thumb for it. They can really work, they can be very beneficial for some students with used in the right way and with a limited time. We would definitely suggest, a trial approach for people that maybe haven't used them before, but definitely, I suppose not distracting from the day-to-day logistics or the day-to-day school activities. So there is a lots of different boxes of them. We would suggest, kind of, if anybody hasn't done them, there's on eBay or on Amazon, you can get a box of like 5 or 6 different types. Again, loads of our adults have loads of these as well, and they use them in work and have them on their desk. or have them in a drawer. They use them as their own, tools that nobody kind of needs to know about. But those box gives you a trial of a few different ones, getting kind of one at a time, because you might find some that you won't like, or they won't be as useful for you, and you'd find others you'd be like, okay, I might like this one. And we'd have the same with kids, that they'd really just like a few, and then they might like one or two others, and they may use them then when they feel like they need them. And then our last most important tool on homework is time limits. So for a student that has different ways of learning, there's nearly always a time element, so I'm a complete contender of that. There's nearly always, I wouldn't say a battle with the clock, but there definitely is a clock concept. So it can start in early primary school. We have lots of kids that struggle with the concept of time, both analog and digital clock. They can then develop, obviously, and know what time it is, but the concept of the amount of time in between each of the minutes can be very, very challenging. So I suppose when we're doing homework, particularly as primary school and we're progressing into secondary school, time can either pass really quickly or it can pass really, really slowly. And for the students that it passes really quickly, that can be very difficult because they can get really consumed in the activity. And this generally happens as we move a little bit more towards senior cycle. So we've so much to do. Okay, I won't go to my swimming today, or I won't do this, or I won't do that. And then it becomes less and less of additional activities. So we would definitely encourage, and there's a lot of skill work behind times and time limits. Don't suggest like loud timers, or well, if it doesn't work for a student, great. But any egg timers, any more soothing alerts instead of a massive alarm clock. It doesn't mean that they need to wake up. Hopefully they're not asleep at their desk. So anything that will shock your system isn't probably a good thing to have as a timer. But it's about setting those realistic objectives. And if it's a child in primary school, liaising hopefully with their teacher as to, okay, how realistic is this to get this particular piece of the maths done, or get this piece of English done, or if they're still involved in Irish, and setting those barriers. Then, well, we only got half done within the amount of time. Is it okay then with the school that we don't do the rest of it now, or we do the other half maybe tomorrow? Having that element of flexibility, and liaising with the school and the teacher as to what is possible around time concepts can be very, very important. And just really important they have their time off in an evening time or in a late afternoon, and to try and recharge and to try and go again then into the rest of the school week. Okay, so we're moving through some of our concepts. We're nearly there, guys. I just feel like it's important to look at the confidence and resilience piece, and then we'll be talking about one or two short areas before we wrap up. And we have a few questions I know that were sent, so I'll go through those also. So the confidence resilience piece is like kind of an invisible wall, I suppose I put it, really. It can be there. It may not have ever been there, but it could be there in some students, and they develop massive masking capabilities, which can be seen as a massive strength, but also quite a difficult concept to move through. And then as we move through the system and we do more and more tests and more weekly spelling tests, and then we do entrance exams and then state exams and freeze, it kind of moves away and moves away, and before you know it, it can be quite minimal, unfortunately. And it may take students until they get to college. They may be in work, they may be in adulthood, and they may never kind of rediscover this element from the aspect of the system. And I suppose the system is definitely not catered a lot towards students that have differences or neurodiversity. It's definitely moving a little bit better, but at this present day and time, there's still a lot of drawbacks, and then there's still a lot of difficulties. And it's important to recognise those, along with the element of strength and courage. It takes really young kids, it takes teenagers to go in every day into a system and into an environment that they may always feel behind in, and every day for 6, 7 hours, sometimes 8, commuting 9, 10 hours, every day to do that for X amount of years can take a massive toll on somebody's well-being without anybody even knowing it. And it may take them a long time to discover it themselves. So we're very passionate about this space because we would see it probably in 1 in every 2 students that have this element that we would very much advocate to be worked on and for us to help them with. So kind of the useful things that would help. So encouraging a growth mindset. There's lots of toolkits. And for our younger students, I'm not sure if anybody came across them. They're an organization, I think, in the States called the Big Life Journal. And they do fabulous, like free booklets that they send out to parents and to teachers around well-being and self-esteem. And there are lots of, definitely like active and interactive sheets, and they do fabulous books then as well that you can order that are really, really great in terms of building confidence and building resilience. The teaching and the discussing resilience, so what that might look like and that becoming more of a familiar concept. Now, we'd have lots of kids that would be more aware of resilience than maybe when I was in school, which is great to know that that's growing and developing, but seeing what it looks like for them and how that can be harnessed. The celebrating achievements often is a little bit jumbled. So in the last number of years, I suppose schools around the country have interjected elements of reward systems, and there's a lot of research that may prove or disprove that they work or don't work. So we don't come at it from that angle. What I do say about celebrating achievements is just in those small day-to-day things. It doesn't have to be they go off and they go to Disneyland or these massive elements of trips or anything like that. And also doesn't have to be related to food. Lots of people associate achievements with, oh, they get chocolate or, and it can be too, of course, within moderation. But it's just about what that looks like for them and how difficult was it for them to do that activity. That could be for a student that has a lot of resistance to school and, went in and did their first full week. That could be, a student that is really, really nervous and goes in and tries their best and sits all of their pre's or even just a few of their pre's. It's really about recognizing how they're doing and how difficult something is and how much of an achievement that can be for them. And how that helps is that obviously over time then we build an element of something hopefully to look forward to. So it's just not that consistent system of we're trying and we're trying and we're trying, and there's very slow progress at times for some elements of the system, and that would be kind of universal depending upon what element of difficulty or difference it can be. And then that can be really disheartening. So it's about, okay, well, I tried and maybe I didn't really get fully where I wanted to this time, or I didn't get a result, or I didn't get all the spellings right. But it's about recognizing and emphasizing the level of investment and the level of effort that it took. Yes, we want some element of results, and that is somewhat linked into the system, unfortunately. But it also is to recognise the level of work that went in prior to whatever they got out of it, because the work element is never seen. So we have kids that will spend hours and hours every single day trying to do their homework, hopefully before they come to us. Hopefully they don't do it now. And that isn't seen in the school system. That's rarely recognized. And they may need to do similar homework the night after and may have forgotten all the night homework from the previous day and have to restart the process again. Positive feedback, we've spoken a little bit about the elements of illustrating and how useful that can be and how that's different from child to child and how that can be kind of beneficial for them to implement. Complimenting, so definitely there's so much science around, but if we compliment somebody else, how much we feel better about ourselves. We've tried this exercise with lots of kids during the pandemic, and they found it really, really good when they did their online classes, and how that can kind of have a trickle effect. We'll always have things going on, particularly for kids or for teenagers. They all have their own dilemmas and dimensions and discovering and figure things out and interactions and friends. And, there's always things to learn and move through. And it needs to be brought back at times to those basics as day-to-day well-being and how they're looking after themselves and how they're being looked after. Limiting social media obviously is a little bit of a contention in this current climate market, so we won't fully get into phone use. And we do some workshops with parents around that concept for especially teenagers. But it can be useful, and it can go into then a less useful territory. But that's a different element for us to double back on. And treating yourself how you treat a friend, and then encourage independence and risk taking within reason, obviously, and calculated risks, which we work on with some of our students. So that's kind of an overview of our content guide. Just before we jump into any questions, as we mentioned, obviously we do a range of group classes. We have the summer camp for anybody that's interested or wants to kind of move forward with any elements that we would offer. And we do a lot of work with Dragon. So it's Dragon, it's the nuanced software that's worth a fair amount of money if people were to buy it, obviously, on the internet. And if anybody wanted to sign up for anything, it was going to initially be today, but I'm happy to extend that. I'm not majorly, bought in under the today. If people get on in the next few days, I'm happy to add that in if anybody wants to avail of any additional help from us. I do have, and we have expanded our team over the last number of months. So there are a team of tutors to provide maybe more of a different monetary bracket. And we totally appreciate that one-to-one tutoring at times can be a very costly approach, and it's definitely something that is difficult in current markets. So we have offered different models as well, that are hopefully a little bit more cost effective if anybody wants to inquire about those. 3 things we would suggest. So the main things after a workshop is to try and think about things that you can do to retain some aspects of the information. So what 3 things can you do just after this, or even in the next 24 hours? Can you liaise with the school? Are you a teacher and can you liaise with the parent? Can you do up maybe the different ways with learning off the spellings? Do they need to do some color overlays? What are any just 3 tiny things? They don't have to be anything major, and we don't have to change the world as of yet, but what are the 3 small things that can help you or help a person that you know or a child at home? Generally, writing them down is the best approach. We'll all think of them in our head, but we do need to write them down, as studies have shown. And sharing them with us would be great. Social media, through email, or sharing them with somebody else. So they've proven recently, especially with the start of 2024, all that goal setting mindset, that if you share it with somebody else, regardless of your connection to them, can generally increase your chances of it actually, you fulfilling it and actually you doing it. So feel free, obviously, to send it to us or send it to, the school or vice versa. This is just a little bit of an overview as to some possible printouts. It's not from the Big Life Journal now. This is the Positivity Present, I think, from what I can see on the screen. But I really like it. And again, feel free to take a screenshot of it, guys. It's just one of those day-to-day things for kids or for teenagers or even for ourselves. We all have things that are going on. So what can make the day a little bit easier is really, really important. And what can, I suppose, create a little bit of those spaces for ourselves to kind of rejuvenate from the day-to-day pressures. We always finish up with a quote. So try to be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. We really enjoyed this quote. We've actually taught it. Well, it was given to us by some of our kids not that long ago in a camp that we did. So we've used it ever since. Just to note, we mentioned Start Podcast. There were podcasts on Apple, and it's also on Podbean, so we can find obviously online. We have some fabulous speakers over the last number of months. Same on our YouTube channel. We've done loads of webinars with doctors and education psychologists and nutritionists and people from the wellbeing space, but just an overview of different practical tools and suggestions. So definitely an awful lot of free resources there for people if they wanted to look into the space a little bit further. Again, thank you for listening. Here is, I'm going to leave up this slide. If anybody has any follow-on questions, anything that they would like to ask, please feel free to get in touch with us.